My name is Missy Alexander. I am the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, and I have the honor of being the MC this evening for what I am sure will be a wonderful conversation about all sorts of amazing experiences, but really about being curious and about being a lifelong learner. He'll tell you all sorts of other things, but I'm telling you that as an academic provost here. We have a program that is in two parts. This evening. We will first hear from our featured speaker, and then the second part will be a conversation among three speakers, and I will introduce them at that point. But I just wanted to alert you to the two-part structure, and then at the end there will be a reception, and we hope that you all stay and join us for that. But to get us started, I'd like to introduce our president, Dr. Manohar Singh. Dr. Singh joined us most recently from the CSU System Office, where he was an ACE Fellow. That's the American Council on Education, where people who are going to be leaders have great experiences. And he also had served as the Dean of the Graduate School at Southern Connecticut State University for 4 years, where he was quite successful in growing enrollment. President Singh holds 2 master's degrees in economics and a PhD in finance, and he's traveled widely and brings a passion for international perspectives to his leadership here at WCSU. I'm sure that he will have great insights, and I ask him to come and introduce our speaker. Dr. Singh.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. It's such a pleasure seeing all those who love to know what it is like to have a journey completed intellectually, still on intellectually, socially, culturally, the curiosity-driven persona of Rudy, the person that the first day I met, I said, you should be a distinguished lecturer for my students, for my faculty colleagues, and you are so inspiring, and your brilliance and wit is so contagious. What I got in response was, you cannot tell it will be a distinguished lecture without knowing me, will it be distinguished or not? So that was like, okay, I just don't need to know anything more. I already now know that it will be distinguished if this is how you think non-linearly. And that's what really got me to become his fan. He's an inspiration to me as president of the university. He's also an accomplished professional. And if you look at life as a population of dots that need to be connected, then the connecting has happened in his life throughout, from being a physicist to being a national security advisor to being a cultural ambassador of arts in his neighborhood and beyond, to being an inspiration for someone like me who just is hungry for knowledge. He brings to the table, for wisdom he brings to the table. So here, I looked at his bio and I said, okay, how do I introduce a man who has done it all, continues to do it all? And I always say of people that when I grow up, I want to be like him. And I don't know if I will ever grow up. It's easy to read a resume and inform you of the facts, but I'm truly not able to, despite being a professor and a PhD in finance and this and that, it's really, I'm not able to describe him beyond what I see appears to be on his bio and resume, because it is not only multidimensionality of his personality, but also the depth. How do you talk about depth of what he has done? How do you paint his legacy he has created over his lifetime? And that is not only going to be continuing to address the younger generation and inspire them, but it is shaping those who consider themselves to be leading the universities and colleges and schools and art scenes and theaters. Everyone is in awe of him, the people I know. So I won't be doing justice by saying a few good words. So I would say just this. That few people and few people's influence on my life has been as tremendous as his within 8 weeks of my knowing him. And I've traveled a lot, not as much as he has. But truly, I have started to seeing things in a different light from a different lens. And I ask myself question when I think of a problem, an issue, as to, all right, let me see from Rudy's lens what it could be. So I'm going to tell you exactly what I've been told in terms of the factuals of his, and then I will move on to inviting him to inspire you the way he has inspired me with his conversations. And I've met him about 3-4 times maximum, but the impact has been as if I have been his student forever. So he got his bachelor's degree in physics and graduate studies from Harvard, got his MBA in R&D strategy and international economics. So right there's a combination of a curious mind. He served in the US Army, combat engineers, national security and intelligence services for over 35 years. In the 1960s, he was a senior associate physicist at the IBM Research Lab. Condensed matter physics, I have no idea what it means, but sounds really good to me. He was a strategic planner at IBM headquarters, worked on corporate responsibility for strategic planning, oversight, assessment of their research and development. He's been a chairman of IBM Long Range Strategic Planning Committee and corporate liaison with the research institute and think tanks all over the world. In the 70s, he was at Hudson Institute, a think tank, that conducted a wide variety of classified studies for the Department of Defense and other agencies involved with national security, including nuclear warfare, chemical, biological, and radiological warfare, asymmetrical and unconventional warfare, terrorism, and counterinsurgency. He was also part of the team that developed a precursor to the internet. We talked about that in one of my meetings today. And he's as plugged into the world as he was when he was doing what today's IBM is known for. Now, he was elected president and served for 5 years, including role of chief security officer, and devoted significant amount of time to proposal writing and reviews of what we have as research and field work within those domains. He had several foreign assignments, including in Iran, Algeria, and Australia. He's an inventor, has 2 patents, and have won numerous awards, published several articles, professional and academic, and has been honored with several academic honors. Currently, Rudy is chairman of Research Advisory Council of Danbury Hospital Biomedical Research Institute. Formerly, he served over 12 years in Danbury Hospital's Board of Directors and Medical Affairs Committee. He's an adjunct scientist at JCVI, Genomic Medicine Department. Kindly join me in applauding his achievements and his contributions, and also welcoming him to share with us the 3 dawns that he wants to talk about. And let's see after the conversation what the discussion questions would be. But I'm looking forward to, Rudy, your conversation here.
After that introduction, I'm looking forward to it as well. I found quickly that I was reminded that teachers can call on people to stand up and give a talk in front of the class. So that's what happened in this short period of time. When it told me it was a distinguished lecture, as you said, I thought, well, that's great. It's like getting an A in a paper before you write it, you know. So it's better than waiting until the end and seeing what you call it. But the curiosity, where did it bring me? Here, right, standing here right now. But a lot of places throughout. I think really it was set in place when I was very young, and well, as a matter of fact, there's when I was growing up, there's a slogan with the toothpaste. You know, you brush your teeth with. You wonder where the yellow went when you brush your teeth with Pepsodent. I wondered where the yellow went, and so it went on, you know, from there. Curious about things in the world around me, things that were happening. And I was born, believe it or not, I'm saying to myself, before World War II. I was born in 1938. And so at that time, there was rationing and there was, you weren't running around to dance class, hockey games, Boy Scouts, anything. And I lived outside of Chicago and a bit west of the lake, north of Chicago. And I grew up in the woods, basically, because you weren't running around. And I had one neighbor that was roughly my age, and that was it. And the slow pace of that era and of literally being around nature and being out in the woods and you know, got a sense of the rhythm of nature. You see flowers come up in the spring, and I liked it. I'm still a sort of mountain and woods types. And I always, since I saw they were taking pictures, someone was taking pictures with an actual camera. It went click and things. It wasn't a phone. And so I found that taking a camera with me on hikes, even if I ran out of film, you're not just trying not to trip over a root or something, but you're looking at lichen, you're looking at that flower arrangement, you're attending to things. And I think the curiosity precedes and follows that. And so that was really an enjoyable childhood. As a child, you don't have a comparison, but I look back on that and I see that the fact it wasn't so frantic, the fact there weren't so many things to do and you know, pushing in all directions and pulling at the same time was an important part of developing a sense of curiosity. And so the world presents itself in a tremendous spectrum of things, and really the issue is not so much to develop curiosity, but to somehow tame it. You know, that I was just saying before that education is lifelong. Knowledge has a shelf life and use by date, and so those here who are students, that badge of being a student is one that you have the honor of wearing for a period of time in your life, and even the law will protect incursion on your ability and opportunity to be a student. And you realize that when you're as old as I am, but not at the time. And good teachers are trying to bring out that curiosity in times which are, you know, personal turmoil, growing up and trying to adapt and adopt to all the pressures and so forth around you. And you know, people see that the world is a very complicated place. Unfortunately, I mean, often I was thinking, just reading something, that no wonder we're an isolationist nation. We have Canada on the north, we have Mexico and Gulf of Mexico in the south, and two huge oceans, and East Coast and Middle West, and the rest don't even understand ourselves. And that only like one in 9 people have ever been more than 500 miles from home, and about the same portion have ever been on an airplane. And so we aren't the most worldly country. And I was also amused by thinking, except for France, which we call France, every other country in Europe calls itself something else. Finland is Suomi. Switzerland is Canton Helvetia. Germany is Alemannia. I mean, we don't even get the names right for the countries in Europe. No wonder it's hard to come and feel part of that, even though that's our derivation. And we all, as I say, we're presented with a complicated world, and it's sort of like the blind man and the elephant, except it's sort of the other way around. We can see, but there are too many elephants. We can't figure out which one. And being a complex world, we're presented with many things that weren't available before. We sort of lived isolated and lived your own life, and now not only the unfathomable is being presented, but a variety of answers of all stripes are being forced on one or put before one, and so you pick and choose, and you get reinforcement. And if you think, well, if somebody tells the Martians did it, then okay, that settles that, and you go back to your life. But once you have beliefs based on lack of analysis or any kind of assessment, those are very hard to unbelieve. So looking with sort of intellectual curiosity at something, and then going through the process that a student would of investigating it, where you used to actually have to look up things like footnotes and materials. You don't have some AI thing writing your paper. Actually, there's a local magazine, and so 06877 is Ridgefield, and sort of takes in the region, shiny sheet. And one of the articles in last month's issue was an article about AI and its both positive and negative influences. And it has these handsome pictures that go with it, and the text is balanced in text. If you didn't read the little thing up in the front that says in sort of beige, we asked the computer to write about we asked artificial intelligence computer to write about artificial intelligence, which it did, a very balanced article, and it created pictures that went with it. If you didn't read that little piece, it's pretty balanced description, but it was not written by a person. And that was in a local magazine. So it is a very complicated world. And unfortunately, people don't come to conclusions with the same, any teacher in the group knows that don't come to the conclusion in the same way. I used to like footnotes because I figured the author liked footnotes, and they had to write the book, but the footnotes are really the fun part. And but intellectually, we don't ask like why is there a Renaissance? How in the world did that happen? Because we had the Dark Ages, and you don't realize at the time. I say it's a bummer. I live in the Dark Ages. I mean, how did that happen? That when we were having our Dark Ages, the world of Islam was having its golden era, and it preserved all of those books that became that were in Latin and Greek and so forth, and became the very basis of the Renaissance. But if you kind of don't pay attention to that, the Renaissance kind of appears. Again, you don't say, I'm living in the Renaissance. Couldn't be better. And up to that point, knowledge was not, in the scientific world, that's empirical, based on facts. What can we know and how can we know it? And before Copernicus and Galileo, it was basically logic. Of course, a big lead ball falls faster than a little lead ball, but it doesn't. And began to understand what science is, science knowledge, and begin to develop a sense of logic and underpinnings, and it became science. But we weren't very attentive, and still aren't, to our past. And again, you don't realize you're living in the Dark Ages at the time. And the Roman Empire, back about 2,000 years ago, took almost that amount of time for Gibbons to sit down and write a book and say, what the hell happened to the Roman Empire? His editor said you ought to have rise and fall of the Roman Empire instead of what the hell happened to the Roman Empire. But it took 2,000 years for somebody to stand back and say, what happened at that point? What relevance does it have to us? So scholarship doesn't just leap into being. And fortunately, water does. It was like says curiosity and where it took me. Well, it took me here. I also say it says 1 day, 3 dawns. Where that came from is I'm trying to write some kind of a memoir or autobiography. Somebody said autobiographies most would have best been written posthumously, so I didn't try the autobiography part. So it's sort of like the biography of the author. But I call it 1 day, 3 dawns for some of the reasons that Dr. Singh mentioned, and that is that the 3 dawns that I've been part of, in a way, were of computers and high-speed electronics. The next one being issues associated with nuclear weapons, nuclear war, and then the third being genomics through involvement with the Venner Institute. Craig was the first one to have sequenced the human genome, all 3 billion base pairs. And so those 3 areas have all been areas of interest, and you need curiosity to drive that interest, or you say it's too complicated. And I sort of draw the line. We were talking about quantum computers before, and I said, got to find somebody who knows about that. Starting from scratch and learning about that, even though I took quantum theory and so forth, just doesn't compute. Doesn't compute. And I thought, well, we'd start out with curiosity. We start with curiosity and instincts. And so I was thinking that really before we're born, we're materializing in the mother's womb, and it's quiet, it's comfortable, you're fed, watered, you're developing into a child, beginning to get some sense of movement, and then one day all hell breaks loose, and you're extruded out into the world, bent out of shape, and suddenly in the light, if you don't know what light is, if you've only seen dark, they give you a swat and you start breathing air when you've only had water. They snip off your food supply and basically sort of manhandle you, and then finally they put you over in the arms of the only other person in the room. Looks like they had a worse day than you did, and that turns out to be the mother. And so you find, well, that's pretty comfortable, and that you have redundant food sources, that's good too. But then you start, the world is nothing but things to be discovered. I mean, even, sure, many of you have seen like babies finding their feet and their toes. I mean, the world is nothing but confusion. Their sight isn't perfect. And so the rest of the world is there to try and sort out. And it can be very frustrating, obviously, to do so. And as you go up and go through school, as I say, you're protected by the badge that says I'm a student, and the teachers try as they might to interest you. If you have curiosity, you don't necessarily pay attention to what's being taught, so you can't totally give in to curiosity. Curiosity is called being a distracted student, which may protect the students at the time, because when you get to middle and high school, you add some hormones to that, and also, although I think it's because the prefrontal cortex doesn't mature until you're about 21, which is the executive function, and that makes sense, that adolescents so forth don't have a fully developed executive function, but they're not fully developed enough to say, it's my prefrontal cortex that caused me to do this. So you're fortunate that they don't have that excuse readily at hand. But it's nothing but trying to sort out an extremely complex world, and it sort of imploded at the moment. There was a professor at MIT, Shelley Turkle, who wrote a book a few years ago that was called Alone Together, and as a description of everybody talking through their cell phones and really not cultivating personal relationships. And there was a good, it was a documentary I don't know exactly who produced it, but it was a young man who'd been in the field of I can't even remember the name, but when you get quick feedback from somebody, quick feedback to, and you present yourself in the best possible way. You're the best possible background for your vacation. Everything is like perfect. And there was a high school senior who, with their parents, were talking. He went around and interviewed. He'd worked with this company where you had to develop software for applications, and if people didn't attend to your particular thing so they could move on for over 15 seconds, then you didn't pass. That was considered attentive. And there was an experiment maybe a few years ago when they took a class, middle school class, and they divided it into two, and they said, we're going to give you a test, we'll just divide you in two. And so it's going to start in about 15 minutes. So the teacher left, and everybody jumped on their cell phones. And room A, it's that when you hit send, it says send, except it actually hung it up in the server. And B, it went back and forth. And so they were filming this. And in A, when it wasn't coming back, they're looking at the expressions and the anxiety and the tension that didn't come back within immediately. Then finally somebody said, are you getting any response? And they said, no. And then they figured out. But it was that period of time of anxiety for lack of instant feedback. And the conversation of the young fellow who was doing the interviews with this high school senior and parents, and she was saying that she realized that she had been crafting herself in the image of the person she would like to be seen as opposed to developing the person that she is. And I think that was a very frank admission, and it was very sobering for her to realize that about herself. But it was said, obviously, genuinely, and even my granddaughter, who's just out of college and is balanced on this sort of thing on the whole, said that, when it first came in, I, for the first time, learned about parties I wasn't invited to. Parties just go along, whether you are or not, but constant feedback. And so bombarded by such things at a rate where curiosity has a potential for getting smothered. It isn't a universal trait, in part because it takes some work to sort out what's important, and even to not be discouraged by what curiosity means if you're going to observe it in any kind of an academic way. And say science goes ahead in sort of a pendulum swing. Curiosity drives a scientist to take imaging. You learn all you can by looking through a microscope that has glass lenses, and then you can't see anything smaller than a particular size. And that's because of the wavelength of light. And so people work away, and they come up with the X-ray microscope, and suddenly you get a whole other next area of resolution, and so many other discoveries can be made. And then you reach the end of the capacity of that particular form of imaging, as well as preparation of the samples and so forth. Bump up against another barrier. And so needs diligence, but also curiosity. And remarkably enough, one of the board members of the Venner Institute he's a virologist. He was the head of the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, which is one of the top medical scientific institutes. And then he's been, for many years, he's roughly my contemporary, with the Royal Academy that gives out Nobel Prizes. And he was chairman of the committee that gave out the physics and the biology prizes. And so he gave a number of talks at the Institute about the individuals, and he's writing a book. He's in his 5th volume of writing this book. He's amazing man, very low-key, just a marvelous man, and about the shoulders of the giants on which the current area of genetics and genomics was built. And there were, obviously a lot of scientists. It goes back in terms of the sequence of their discoveries, but a high proportion of them didn't pursue their field further. The image would be, of course, my image was, you get to a barrier, you make it over, and then continue. Even Watson Crick with the double helix, Watson came over to the United States to head the Cold Spring Harbor Research Institute, and I had an opportunity to interview him shortly after he was there. So I assumed he was going to, in America, which had bigger science budgets and so forth, pursue that field. And his answer basically was that he recognized the stature that he and Crick had from their breakthrough, but he came to the United States because at that point cancer research was all fragmented, not brought together, and he was going to use his reputation, his strength, to try and bring that field together. But very few. Sanger got 2 Nobel Prizes. He came up with the Sanger sequencer and another, but most did not pursue the field in which they did not pursue the next step beyond the area in which they got the Nobel Prize. And so in imaging now, it's continued. I send every once in a while peer-reviewed articles to John Murphy, who is a neurologist and head of the New Vance, and a couple of others who are in neurology, where continued, and actually the man who's the head of Silver Hill Hospital is an MD PhD. His PhD was in imaging, and then he took up psychiatry, and so I send articles as I see them that come up with imaging, and now it's down to like 3 angstroms. You can see neural networks firing. I mean, you can see things that were inconceivable not many years ago, and to those who were in the field, they reached the limits, and then the creativity, curiosity comes in. Some give up, and some pursue it. But and I was fortunate, as I say, in a sense that I didn't have all of the distractions when I was a young kid, and could take in some nature, if you will. But also, I was a kindergarten dropout, I have to admit. You don't get that. You didn't read about that, right? As the beginning. Because I'd grown up, again, with one neighbor in the woods, and then when you entered kindergarten, you went to a public school on a bus, and so the other kids had grown up in neighborhoods, and they were playing together, roughhousing together. I didn't know how to do any of that. They used to say they played Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, and I was, So literally I dropped out, or I was dropped out or something, and then came back again in school in first grade, where there was a context, and I moved on from there. I noticed the yellow light went on over here. So I was going to jump to the end first, because how long is a talk? How long is a piece of string? No, it can go on. And to the students and to others, I've had sort of a mantra that I've adopted over the years, which is trying to do things that are stimulating, mentally stimulating, keeps, as Poirot says, the little gray cells busy, rewarding, you have to put food on the table, but also find the rewards from doing it, and worthy, something worthwhile doing. And you put that together with curiosity. There's plenty to be curious about, more than ever, as we move into areas. We were just talking about quantum computing before, like, as I say, taking quantum theory, but that doesn't tell me what to do. And then in the area of international affairs and the other areas that I mentioned, there are endless opportunities to pause, exercise curiosity. And what I didn't do today, sometimes, and academics will understand, if I'm going to talk about something, I'll write a memo to self and then read that and see what I know about it, because you organize things differently if you write them down. I didn't do that today, so you're the victims of it. But it says, curiosity, and where it took me here to the end of my allotted time. So thank you for listening. Are you gonna summarize what I said? No?
Yes, I am.
You are? I will grab water, a seat, and turn on my
There you are.
mic. There we go.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for that interesting connectivity. But I really like that it started alone in the woods. I really do. I see the value of that lack of structure. Indeed, I also benefited from that in my childhood. But we are at the next part of this this conversation, this fireside chat, and I'd like to invite President Singh back up to the stage to join us, and also to introduce Dr. Anna Malavisi, who will join us. Dr. Malavisia is a professor in our philosophy program. She is also a teacher of things as exciting as engaged philosophy, peace and justice studies, social and political philosophy. She has a wide-ranging knowledge of global issues from a really interesting life herself, which has involved being a nurse, being in global partnerships with NGOs, and teaching for us, which is pretty fabulous that we get to benefit from her time here. And I'm going to turn it over to them, but because they gave me the microphone, which is a terrible idea, I'm going to just make one question/comment to start you off, or you'll ignore it completely. I give you that privilege. But I was listening to you, and I was thinking about a conversation that I had with my sister about 30 years ago when she was living in Australia, and she had 2 young children. And she said, my friends ask me, when does imagination start? And I don't understand what they're asking because my children are fighting over an imaginary hat. In other words, this was the context, imagination. And I would wonder about the connection between curiosity, imagination, and invention. I leave it to you.
It's a great question. Yes, please.
Well, imagination enriches the world. Is my speaker speaking? I turned it on. Okay. I think of two grandkids who are out in Montana, and they saw an animal when they were young, the armadillo. They saw turning up or down the sound. We'll see. Armadillo when they were young, and so they began to love armadillo as an idea, but they'd also seen it. And so they started to draw little kids things of an armadillo and pictures, and then they were like 7 and 5. And then they developed sort of like armadillo language that armadillos would speak. And so when I think they turned about 8, one of them turned 8 or 9. Daniel's my son, her father, took him to a zoo where they had armadillos, and they were in the all other animal category because they couldn't figure out. And so I asked when they came back, did they speak armadillo to armadillo with it? Mm-hmm. But the imagination was great because they had a lot of fun with it. Mm-hmm. And imagination is at the basis of scientific discovery, because if you're imagining, again back to imaging, if you're imagining, limits, what could you see if you could see this? Mm-hmm. What could you do if you could do this? And I can't think of an area of science which doesn't prosper by using imagination, and then focus, and then diligence, and then the ability to draw conclusions, and the there was a book a number of years ago, we were talking about outside, inside, called The Last Kid Outdoors. When people pay to have their lawn mowed while the kids inside doing video games. And so the detachment between sort of the wonder of things all around us and the opportunity those wonders can be rewarding in and of themselves, but they can also yield to wondering about the wonders. I happened to be up in Cambridge not long ago, and it sounds too good to be true. And Craig Venter was talking about a new book that Harvard had just published on a survey that he and some others had done around oceans of the world, looking for the biological diversity. And while any cubic inch of water or dirt outside your house has about 100,000 bacteria and 1 million viruses, good viruses, friendly viruses. The ocean is roughly the same. So he was talking about, he likes to talk like this instead of give a lecture. And the interviewer was a Bulgarian astrophysicist. Now you can't beat that for a Harvard position. But he's the guy who knows, who's trying to figure out how many galaxies, universes. He's using the findings of the Hubble just to keep reaching. And he's charming, excited. So that's a long answer to a question which I've nearly forgotten.
Well, I want to maybe add a dimension to that, because as Missy introduced me as a philosopher and one who works in social, political, and engaged philosophy, I was at a conference last week with Concerned Philosophers for Peace. And my presentation included imagination and thinking that we need new imaginaries to think about how we look at violence or how we respond to violence. So imagination, I think, is really important, as well as curiosity, right? But maybe you'd like to sort of think about or talk about maybe not just scientific imagination, but how would moral imagination look like? Or what do you think about the importance of imagining different ways we respond to violence, for example? Yeah.
Let me put sort of a framework around that. I was thinking that when we were at Hudson Institute, we didn't observe this specifically. We're great for thinking up paradigms and things. The 4 levels of agreement. The first level of agreement, we agree on something. The second level is we disagree, but based upon facts or analysis. And you go back and do your homework, and then you come back and you'll find out what the differences were, and then come together. The third is based on value structure. If somebody is Catholic, doesn't believe in abortion, somebody isn't, you're not going to solve that, but at least you can reveal what the basis is for the disagreement. And the 4th level is the fist fight. So, but anyway, but the ability to come to the 2nd level of agreement, understand that it's based upon facts or analysis versus it's based on value systems. And in the area of genomics, it's been sort of, I promise not to go into the germ line, which means the reproductive line, so that you don't get talking pigs and things. So you're supposed to stay away. Then Professor He in China had twins where CRISPR had removed genes and replaced them with genes that meant they were not susceptible to HIV, and the world went, all the ethicists and everybody went wild about having crossed that barrier, and the Chinese said, naughty, naughty, and mainly don't talk about it. And so trying to have strictures that are moral strictures on behaviors or attitudes toward violence, or it comes up in massive terms, in terms of treatment of immigrants, not just within this country,
well, a lot of countries.
Thousands and thousands that are interred outside of this country. And how much, if you want to have someone come from one of those camps to Danbury, you have to have it staffed, manned, funded. I mean, like, they did studies years ago about prisoners, and they found that if you have somebody tutor the prisoner, they can get their high school diploma and so forth, and times how many prisoners. No, you can't do that, you know, and despite the value, the ethics of trying to do that, some problems are just beyond the ability to either define boundaries or limitations, or beyond the general moral fiber of the rest of those around you to catch that particular set of beliefs or set of behaviors, which can be described as abhorrent, but in many cases are survival issues on the part of those that hold them. Is that an answer? It seems sort of like an answer. Felt like an answer.
I do take one step further, that the complexity that we have, whether it is natural sciences that are trying to describe that, or whether it is human, mm-hmm. and then derived from human, the philosophical, the religious, and multiplicity of political and economic and whatnot. The complexity, in fact, this conversation started with the complexity and how chaotic that is. So chaos, in my mind, is the origin of imagination. Sometimes, to escape chaos, you imagine solutions. Sometimes chaos is just itself so fascinating that you start finding solutions or creative outlets to say, okay, let me see what happens out of this. But to bridge the two, I do believe that the artists that we see, the work of a painting or musical composition or theatrical art or even scientific discoveries are driven out of some kind of multiplicity of chaotic thoughts, if you would, or unresolved positions, if you would. But what I am looking at is all the chaotic leading to curious and curiosity-driven solutions. There's another C to this. There's a complexity, chaotic, curiosity. Needs courage to experiment with anything scientific, let's say. Will this theory work with that? Can I be able to find a faster chip? It's courage that you want to have so that your curiosity brings into shape your creativity, right? And I believe that because of dynamic nature of chaos, unlike natural phenomena, which can be defined a little more certain than human, I do believe that we are miles and miles and miles away from finding that pace with which we can keep up with the mind of a human, creating chaos. Natural, you have figured out how to contain floods and how to heat your homes and blah, 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 how to find genomic sequences and fight some disease. But this morality and ethic and peace and love that would be is so dynamic that your imagination will have to go one step further that I have not yet been able to imagine myself to say, all right, remember the song that Beatles had, Imagine? There's
John Lennon.
John Lennon, right? So that imagination will continue. The only way, and there is no solution in my world of chaos and creativity and courage that tells me that there's a solution X, Y, and Z, and that's it. There will be no more problems in the world, because we have been seeing this from the dinosaurs' age. The generations came and generations went, and then human species, we had society and social and law and whatnot. Those were good arrangements to create some order compared to dinosaurs. Nature, as they say, is bloody. We have tamed a bit of it, but the curiosity and chaos has to continue on kind of giving us, as you mentioned, a continuous exploration, continuous next level. And then you look at that barrier and say, oh my God, there is another 1,000 kilometers or miles to go to figure out what that remains like an elusive solution to human problems that we speak here. But that's such a beautiful parallel to say curiosity leading us to a peaceful, loving world. So that I didn't imagine that this conversation will go there, but this is such a, that was not my imagination, but this is such a beautiful bent to this, given especially your experience in different parts of the world. And certainly these could be, there's another word that starts with C, but I'm controversial, right? So I don't know why the C is the theme of this talk today, but you can think about this as continuing our conversation. But given what the science, if you would, given your physics, and the philosophy, again, two P's here, I'm wondering if in your world you see science as a solution, catalyst towards a solution.
Do you want to respond to that?
I was going to say that up until until really the 1800s, science was called natural philosophy, even after Galileo, even after Copernicus. And scientist wasn't a word that somebody who does science wasn't created or generated until the early 1800s by a professor at Cambridge. But there's the paradigm or the lumping of science under this sort of mysterious natural philosophy continued long after empiricism began its course. And even if you're talking about the arts, that I can't paint stick figures, but arts, even arts have periods, have area where periods of art are not appreciated, a generation behind. And I guess as an artist, you wouldn't like to hear your art will really be valuable after you're dead. It's a, but so art, and the reason some of the great collections were able to be by Duveen and others shopping for the Rockefellers and others was because he went and got classical art, Greek statues, he got classic art. What other things are out of fashion? So I mean, even ethics are out of fashion. We use the cradle of democracy. It wasn't all democracy. There were those who qualified to vote. But then again, things that I think of the frictions between Islam and Christianity. For centuries, those who were Muslim and those who were Jewish and Christians, they weren't taxed because they're all people of the book, of Moses. So it didn't start out, if you're looking at today, as a characteristic posture of these different religions. You can get up to 2 billion Muslims before you ever count any country in the Middle East. So you have to get, that's why curiosity has to be backed by footnotes and facts.
So the science is very, very important. And you're right, because Bertrand Russell writes about that in his volume on history of Western philosophy. Philosophy is known as sort of the mother of disciplines. Once a area of philosophy sort of had its own sort of theories and hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, had its own study, became a science, became biology, became chemistry, became psychology. Right? But of course, science on its own is not enough, right? And I think that's just going back to what you said about the Chinese scientist who was able to create, sort of fetuses with, using CRISPR and gene editing. It just raised a lot of ethical issues. So, and I think that just sort of highlights the importance of interdisciplinary work in the sense of nothing on its own is good enough. And I think the climate crisis is another example because yes, the science is really important. And I think there's enough scientific evidence to say that we do have a problem. But of course, the problems that we're going to be faced with now and in the future are not scientific problems alone. They're going to be social problems. So we really need philosophers and historians and psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists to be able to respond to these very complex problems.
I was going to make a comment that I didn't make before, that people know I've done a lot of things, and so they're often approached with a question, not like, how was your vacation, but, what do you think that the unexpected consequence on Putin and his war in Ukraine derives from Finland with its 830-mile border and St. Petersburg not being far away, having recently joined NATO? To which I was on. That was an excellent question. A lot of people just go away happy that they don't even, that they ask an excellent question, not so interested in the answer. But talk about the climate change. We would be under a mile of ice back in the ice age right here. You go on the top of in the Catskills, Wittenberg Slide and Cornell, go on the top, they're 4,000 feet higher, and there's a glacial moraine. Glaciers have been up there. Another thing which is a conversation stopper, if you look at the Hudson River, which goes out, and there's the continental shelf, drops off. Look at the Hudson River canyon, and if you remove the water, if the water was down to such a level that there is a canyon that goes out to the edge of the continental shelf, and so the water came down the Hudson, continued along the continental shelf, and dropped in. Well, it takes a while to make a canyon. And we weren't there. We didn't do that. I didn't do that. And so you have to understand some of the physical dynamics. Sure. There's nothing no word of God or man that says New Orleans should be built 8 feet underwater, whatever. So that some of these things, yes, we can accelerate them, but some of the most rapid changes in temperature per year were the melting of the ice, or we'd still be under ice. That's not an answer. That's just informed aggression. Okay. Can I get away with that?
I remember, I will not name the person or the affiliation of that person. Scientific facts are scientific facts. But there was someone who said, well, everybody has their own facts. I don't remember exact quote, but they said there are two different versions of fact. Something like that. I don't seriously remember, just forgot. But facts are objective to some extent. They may be incomplete in the sense you may see, oh, it's dark. Doesn't mean that it will never be light. It is dark, yes, that's a fact. But there will be a morning tomorrow, that's a different fact. Question then boils down to the years of wisdom of religious scriptures, the philosophies of the world, the legal, ethical parameters that we have started defining our society into. The bigger question that comes to mind is, what was philosophically relevant at one point of time? Is it relevant to current human beings, if you would? That is a different level of curiosity that I have. In that sense, if the chaos that we look at, whether it is human conflict everywhere or anywhere, if that is because of the dynamic nature of our progression as philosophers, economists, finance, combine that with technology, does everything that come to our mind as a reaction to our human intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence? I do believe human intelligence is beating everything else that has been created to solve the problems created by human intelligence. We're always going with the catch-up to, oh my God, there's another problem created by human intelligence, if you would. Who is going to create a solution to tapping human intelligence for good rather than for not that good? That's my curiosity. That's my question for all of us. I don't know who's going to answer that.
I know who's going to answer that.
I'm not too sure I have an answer for that one, just because I sort of, well, we have the responsibility as humans to be able to do that. We have the knowledge and we have the capacity. Whether we will have the will is another thing.
Ingrown beliefs have long legs, and so it's very hard to overcome things that are generational. I mean, a lot of people know. I mean, students will know that Spain was occupied by Islamic Arabs for a period of time, 500 years, 20 generations. That's two times the age of our country. That makes an impression. They didn't pass through, you know. So you have to get a perspective on how the external forces change the beliefs and the values and perspectives and, you know, basically everything that describes a culture. So it doesn't stand still, and aspirations have never done very well. In that, again, like the drawing the line at the scientifically and genetics at the germ line. Already, a pig's heart. We've used pig valves for a long time. That's just kind of cartilage. That doesn't get rejected. A pig heart was transplanted in a human, who died not long. But DeBakey's first transplant of a human heart into a human, that person died. But feasibility was shown, and multiple organs are now being grown, you know, within other animals. Now, there's certainly ethical questions, but in terms of the potential benefits, because each hospital has an ethics board that says we have 8 patients that need kidney transplants, we have 4 possibilities, age, you know, how do you, so they're always going to be dilemma. We're not going to get a dilemma free. We don't get that ride.
No, life wasn't meant to be easy, right?
That's what Malcolm Fraser said.
Did he? Did he?
We're
He's an
talking
Australian a former Australian Prime Minister.
Australia, the country was going downhill. The unions are on strike, and he gave a talk before a roaring fireplace in his place, saying life was not meant to be easy. But he was out of office now after that point.
No, but the question I have is another C part of it is like, if it is chaos and conflict, is conflict because of differences of perceptions, of beliefs, of appearances, of perspectives? Can you imagine a world where there are no differences and everybody is a clone of each one else? Is that a desirable state? Because there will be no conflict.
We don't have that problem.
Yeah.
At the moment, I mean, during the period where we and the Russians were faced off, mutual assured destruction and on that, you could fly over and count the silos. You could see some evidence. You could measure what the capacity was. But we're engaged in a conflict beyond, as we sit here. You can't see it or feel it so much, but the ability to wreak havoc that beyond what we've had in the Dr. Strangelove era, you know. Say something uplifting.
Well,
no, but
I know,
it's true. I mean, really, that our so-called peer enemies of China and Russia, they're moving as fast as they can to dominate every aspect, and that's not you can't be a philosopher if you're up against a military situation, as much as one would like to intervene. It's basically very practical. I don't mean to be grim on the subject, except the subject is very grim and to a certain extent intractable. And it's based upon strategies that people are thinking up. The Chinese are buying up every port and mineral right around the world. That's not a philosophical question. It's a survival question. So say something happy. Say something other than 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes. Okay, that's more positive.
But I can tell you the positivity of your creativity is that we found vaccination for COVID within 18 months, if you would. That is creativity. Somebody must have said, okay, I think we can do that, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody created the computing powers of supercomputers who figured out what the reactions would be to the body and whatnot. The beautiful part of our existence in my mind, of the creativity, is that there is no limit to movement forward. We had for ages conflicts, we have conquered them as a collective human species. Individually, yes, when India and Pakistan got divided, my parents suffered a lot. But Pakistan survived, India survived, I am here, my kids are in New York City. It continues. And that is, I think, the most happy thing, most beautiful thing, if you would, that we shall prevail as a species.
We shall prevail. However, there's still a sense of a philosophical notion that some lives are more grievable than others. And I think that creates a lot of inequality.
Yeah, that's true.
And a lot of disparity and a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
So you talked about the COVID vaccine, that yes, we were very quick at creating, developing a COVID vaccine, but the rich countries were the ones that bought up all the vaccines and left not very many, or not very much, for poorer countries. So there's a lot of COVID inequity in sort of as far as access to vaccines. So the science is great, right? I think that's where we go forward. But however, then we go 10 steps back because we still treat other humans as subhumans. So I think that's something that we always have to keep in mind. Right? Sorry, I'm an ethicist, right?
Well, my colleague Herman Kahn was asked, are you an optimist or a pessimist? He said, I'm an optimist, but I'm not sure my optimism is fully justified. So that's sort of that's where I'll end that.
Well, I'd like to thank this group for an amazing.
Sorry if I took it.